Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. Coming to you live from Seoul, I'm Han Da-eun. After surprising the world with a new military pact with Russia, North Korea is ramping up its missile provocations, boasting the capacities of what it claims to be new type tactical missiles. That's as South Korea resumed live fire drills near the inter-Korean border and conducted the first ever multi-domain joint military drill with the U.S. and Japan, sending a strong message to the North. Amid heightened tensions on the Korean peninsula, the Central Committee of North Korea's Workers' Party wrapped up a 4-day key plenary meeting. For an expert analysis on North Korea's latest activities and their implications, Dr. Myong-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy, joins us in the studio. It's great to have you back.
It's nice to be here.
So North Korea fired two ballistic missiles early Monday morning, and the South Korean military said that one of them seems to have exploded in midair with debris falling on land near its capital, Pyongyang. But North Korea later claimed that it successfully tested a new type tactical missile that can carry a super large warhead. What's your analysis of the latest missile launch?
Well, the North Koreans claim that the reason why the second missile that exploded in midair didn't reach quite the range it was specified to reach was because it was intentional on the part of North Korea. And the explanation they put out was the North Korea, essentially tried to test the lower bound of their purported range of their new missile system. According to the North Koreans, the lower bound for the missile system is 90 kilometers, and the upper bound is around 600 kilometers. So the first missile, according to the North Korean claim, tested the upper bound, which indeed reached the 600 kilometers range. And of course, the second one, with the South Koreans observed having exploded in midair, in fact, reached the lower range, according to the North Korean justification. But the reason why we have to give more credence to the South Korean explanation is because the direction to which the second missile flew towards was Pyongyang city itself, where the plenary meeting is taking place in plain view, also as Kim Jongun being present. So in North Korea especially, sending a live missile towards the capital city when Kim Jong-un himself is in the public stage would be a major no-no, as well as a major risk to the life of the leadership in North Korea. So chances that this test trajectory wasn't intentional. So if the direction was wrong, chances that range was also not intended to be the lower bound of the technical specification of this new missile type.
The South Korean military called North Korea's missile launch a deception. It claims that it was successful, a deception. But whether the missile was a failure or not, it seems like North Korea's missile technology is advancing with each test. Now, some analyze that North Korea's latest missile launch could have been aimed at exports to Russia. How do you see what's your take on this, and how do you see North Korea's latest series of provocations that included, according to its claims, were successful tests of ballistic missiles carrying multiple warheads as well as a super large warhead?
Well, chances that the North Koreans are developing a super large warhead short-range ballistic missile. And if they are doing so, it's clearly intended for the Russian export at this point. Because what we have seen throughout last year was that the frequency of North Korean provocations involving this type of missile, which we believe to be a KN-23 short-range ballistic missile, which in fact, interesting enough, is a copy of the Russian original short-range ballistic missile called Iskander-M. So clearly it was originated from Russia, at least the design. And now what we have seen since last year was that the frequency of provocations employing this particular missile dropped down significantly. In fact, actually dropped down to zero after Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin met at the Vostochny airspace in Russia for their first summit in many years. So if you look at the juxtapose the decrease in the frequency of provocations using the KN-23 missiles, and also we observed that there's an increase or usage of a KN-23-like or Iskander missile in the Ukrainian war theater by the Russians. It looks like the North Koreans might have been exporting the entirety of their KN-23 stock to Russia, obviously because Russia is paying top money for the North Korean missiles at this point. So if North Koreans are developing a super large warhead for their KN-23 missile, chances that they're going to export to Russia, not just because of a revenue, but also the motivation to test operationally their new missile type. So it's likely that the North Koreans are going to export their first batch of the new tactical missile to Russia for their use in Ukraine.
With regards to North Korea's possible missile exports to Russia, it would be a surprise to no one, as North Korea's missiles were found on the battlefields in Ukraine, according to various reports, not to mention the cozy relationship between Kim and Putin and, of course, their new military pact. South Korea resumed live fire drills at artillery ranges near the land border with North Korea, which marked the first time in 6 years. But the military refrained from blaring loudspeaker broadcasts this time. How do you assess the level of South Korea's response to North Korea's latest provocations?
So it's a message. It's a message from South Korea to North Korea that South Korea is ready to respond kinetically with overwhelming firepower against any escalation on the North Korean side from the present state of I would say exchange of propaganda balloons from both sides. So the concern, not really a fear, but the concern on South Korean side is that by responding with loudspeakers to North Koreans sending the trash balloons to South Korea, that North Koreans might use that as an argument to essentially escalate the current friction to a level that involves actual firepower. Such as artillery dual attack against the South Korean territory, like the one we observed back in 2010 and the shelling of the Yeonpyeong Island. So, in a way, the current exercise could be interpreted as a South Korean way to preempt the North Korean intentions to escalate by demonstrating that if there's a further escalation and the North Koreans are tempted to use actual firepower to attack the South Korean side, the South Koreans are going to respond probably the triple the amount of attacks that North Koreans are going to possibly mount against South Korea.
South Korea, of course, doesn't want any further escalation on the Korean peninsula. So it's part of their calculation. But the live fire drills were held after South Korea suspended the 2018 inter-Korean military agreement. And Defense Minister Shin Won-sik, he is speaking before lawmakers at the parliament today, said that the agreement is so unfair to South Korea that it's like swapping a massive piece of land in the most expensive Gangnam area with a tiny piece of land in the countryside. So it looks like we'll continue to see South Korea will continue to beef up border defense along the border.
Well, it's more about readiness, I would say. The readiness on the part of South Korea send a message to North Korea that there's a very strong defense posture against the North. And if North Koreans are tempted to escalate, like the one they're doing right now by sending trash balloons, essentially it's an invitation to South Korea to escalate, that we're not taking the bait. But then also we are telling the North Koreans that with these exercises, that we know what they're trying to do with the trash balloons, what's going to take after the trash balloons, and they were trying to preempt their next move.
North Korea criticized South Korea, the U.S., and Japan for developing what it called the Asian version of NATO after the three countries' first multi-domain joint drill dubbed the Freedom Edge. It slammed their quote-unquote provocative military muscle flexing against North Korea, warning of fatal consequences. Is this part of Pyongyang's attempt to justify its military alliance with Russia?
Well, there are many different ways to look at it, but then there's a consistency on the North Korean statement. North Korea has been saying for many years by now that the region, the Northeast Asia, has entered the so-called era of the new Cold War. So what it means is that there are two major blocs emerging in Northeast Asia. So there's the North Korea, Russia, China axis on one hand, and there's the Korea, Japan, United States bloc on the other. And this is something that the North Korea has been claiming in order to justify their, I would say, aggressive stance towards Korea, Japan, and the United States. So by saying that Korea, Japan, and the United States are mounting aggressive or offensive measures against North Korea, that would justify their nuclear and missile development in the first place. And now, as you said, by signing this alliance with Russia, North Korea is claiming that this. I mean, so there are two levels to this, and one is clearly the fact that the North Korea and Russia are doing this in response to Korea, Japan, and the United States, but also to characterize their alliance as one of a defensive alliance. So that had been mentioned in the press conference, in which both the leaders of both Russia and North Korea claimed that the alliance that they just signed happened to be defensive in nature. So there's a continuation of that sense here. And also there's another motivation here, I believe, by using the term NATO. So it's something that is actually essentially a word, a term that's very sensitive. Not so much here in the Korean Peninsula or Japan, but in China and Russia. NATO it stands in for a major Western aggressiveness, and China is very critical of the U.S. effort to revamp the security architecture, make the security alliances the U.S. has with the allies here much more effective and flexible. And China characterizes the U.S. efforts as the Asian NATO. So the North Korean, by using the term NATO, is just sending a message to Moscow and Beijing at the same time. And by doing so, North Korea is highlighting the fact that their strategic stance or approach is exactly the same as China and Russia's.
So it could be part of North Korea's tactic to further solidify the North Korea-Russia-China axis.
Yeah.
A plenary Central Committee meeting of North Korea's Workers' Party has wrapped up, but unlike many had anticipated, there were no mention of the new military pact signed between North Korea and Russia. What took center stage then? And we've talked a little bit about this before, but what's expected from the upcoming Spring People's Assembly?
So North Korea loves to surprise the international media. The international media expected North Korea to announce with grand fanfare that the follow-up measures to the signing of the pact between them and Russia. But then I think North Koreans, in order to somehow, I don't know, surprise us, essentially only announced that I think it's a partial outcome of the meeting, which happens to be focused on the economic achievements. So we can look at this in different ways, but a benign interpretation was North Korea is essentially celebrating the achievement of not so much achievement, diplomatic victory, but they are trying to somehow highlight their domestic achievements in the economic front, so that essentially to remind the people of North Korea that Kim Jong-un hasn't forgotten about them. So even though North Korea had put a lot of energy in hosting Vladimir Putin, in highlighting the signing of the pact with Russia, Kim Jong-un is going back to the domestic front and telling the people that North Korea had made progress in the economic front. Interesting enough, Kim Jong-un announced that North Korea had overachieved in economic outputs. And if that's indeed true, then it probably means that it reflects the expansion of trade, or recovery, I would say, of the North Korea's external trade from the COVID years. We know that the North Korea's trade, not just with Russia, but also with China, has increased significantly, even though it hasn't recovered back to the pre-COVID levels. And increase in trade also a proxy for consumption in North Korea. So I mean, if there's an increased trade, it means that average North Koreans are consuming more, so which is a good sign. And hopefully North Koreans are essentially past the food emergencies that we've been very much afraid about, and in a much better state now.
Another aspect of the plenary meeting that grabbed media attention is the badges with a portrait of leader Kim Jong-un. Senior officials at the meeting were seen wearing the badges for the very first time. What are you reading into this?
Well, this was also a long time coming, I would say. So Kim Jong-un has been working on making, I would say, starting up a cult of personality around him since at least 2021. And we know this because that was when the North Koreans started to publicize, also essentially unveiling personal portraits of Kim Jong-un. And then in this portrait, Kim Jong-un was depicted exactly like his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, in the Kim Il-sung's signature white military dress. So this denotes something in North Korea, essentially signaling that Kim Jong-un is now had become a major leader of North Korea, a major historical figure, just like his grandfather in the country. And then that was taken as an indication that the North Koreans were preparing the first steps towards making Kim Jong-un a very powerful figure, which in case in North Korea would mean that Kim Jong-un would have the same status as Kim Il-sung, his grandfather. We know Kim Il-sung in North Korea has a status of a demigod. So in that sense, I think the appearance of the Kim Jong-un badges, and that implies that the efforts put into the cult of personality around Kim Jong-un has been making progress steadily. And now I think there will be more news of this kind coming in the near future. We should be prepared for this.
13 years, it's been 13 years now into the Kim Jong-un regime, and Kim looks like he's now elevating his status to the level once reserved for his father and grandfather. A large vessel, meanwhile, has been spotted docked at North Korea's Da-eun port this week, fueling speculation about possible weapons trade between North Korea and Russia. How does the U.S., how should, rather, the U.S. deal with growing North Korea-Russia arms cooperation?
Well, there are some options. I mean, we cannot stop North Korea and Russia from conducting their weapons trade. I mean, that would involve major military action, and no one has an appetite for that, thankfully. But then what we can do is essentially sanctioning the entities that are involved, and also trying to curtail the flow of finance into these kind of operations. But then I think those will be measures that are more symbolic than effective. But the best way would be to prepare South Korea and Japan and the United States with measures to counteract any outcome from the weapons trade that's taking place right now. So, for instance, there's a less concern, at least in this part of the world, and also with the United States, relatively speaking, about the outflow of weapons from North Korea to Russia. The war in Ukraine is ongoing, and Ukrainians are having difficulties fending off the offensive by Russians. But then this can be countered by supplying more weapons to Ukrainians. What's more worrisome is the transfer of sensitive nuclear and missile technologies to North Korea. And this is going to be much more problematic for everybody involved. And obviously because North Korea is developing these weapon systems, and they also made it very clear that they intend to use them. So it's going to be important to stop the flow into North Korea of sensitive North Korean technology. And I think in this case, sanctions are going to be in place, but I think the international community could essentially leverage the Russian weakness in the Ukrainian front to somehow send a message to Russia that they should interrupt or stop sending these technologies to North Korea. So I think the key lies with having more assistance being given to the Ukrainians that's more lethal, that's more effective, so that the Russians feel the pain, and they feel the pain because it's going to be the consequence of their actions with North Korea.
And how the U.S. deals with North Korea, of course, is an important point of discussion because Washington's North Korea policy holds great significance to South Korea, to the Northeast Asia, to the Asia-Pacific region, and beyond. And staying in the U.S., U.S. President Biden and former President Trump, during their first TV debate, they discussed little about North Korea, just trading a few remarks about how how each of them handled Kim Jong-un. But reports are coming in that many countries are readying themselves for Trump's possible comeback after Biden's poor debate performance. What should South Korea take away from the debate?
Well, the debate itself revealed, as you said, very little about each. I mean, we know what President Biden thinks about the alliance. He had restored the importance the alliance had in the U.S. foreign policy. So we very much welcome that, and the allies responded eagerly by working very closely with the United States in revamping and renewing the security architecture the United States has around the world. With former President Trump as a different equation. But he said little about the alliance. He said more about Kim Jong-un and the other dictators that he had met. And he seems to be very confident and that he can handle them personally. So what we can get from this little interaction that the two candidates had about the future of the U.S. foreign policy is that whereas President Biden is going to stick the course, put the priority on the alliance, with President Trump, it's going to be a different game. I think he's going to conduct his foreign policy more based on the personal interactions with the counterparts. I don't think that's not only limited to the dictators, but also to other leaders with the U.S., I mean, essentially with any country. And I think that this is something that we have to take into consideration. So if President Biden was thinking about the U.S. foreign policy in the framework of a multilateralism, President Trump is going to be approaching this more in terms of bilateral relations, more of a personal interaction. And I think that this is something that we have experienced before in President Trump's first presidency. So we know something about it. We have an experience, and I don't think he's going to change his style completely. So at least there's a less uncertainty about his foreign policy approach compared to from the first time that he became the president. So I think in that sense, we are more prepared, and then I think we shouldn't be too worried about the potential return of President Trump back to the White House.
Well, Mr. Trump has the tendency to take a business approach to alliance-related issues. And as you pointed out, he prefers the one-on-one relationship with world leaders and dictators, and he prefers bilateral relationship rather than multilateral relationship. So South Korea, we shouldn't be over worried about his possible comeback, but we will need corresponding strategies. Thank you so much, Dr. Go, as always, for your in-depth analysis.
Always my pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.